Growing up, I spent many summers in the Ozarks. At an early age, I fell in love with its rich history of lawmen and bandits. Over the years, I've learned much more about the Ozarks, including its dark and mysterious lore. Join me, Blasky, as I dive into this lore, the myths, superstitions, and urban legends of the Ozarks. This is Ozark Mountain Lore. The English Dictionary defines an urban legend as an often lurid story or anecdote that is based on hearsay and widely circulated as true. True, the word in question. When we hear these stories of haunted hospitals or escaped mental patients wandering the woods, we become oddly fascinated by them. But where do these stories come from? Just campfire stories created by kids to scare their friends? Or is there a kernel of truth in there? On this episode, we will look at 3 urban legends that have intrigued and frightened teenagers for decades. The legend of the Albino Farm, Hatchet Man Bridge, and the spook lights of Joplin. The lore surrounding the so-called Albino Farm has kept teenagers seeking it out since the 1980s. An urban legend of a pale-skinned killer victimizing anyone unfortunate to find themselves trespassing on his farm. Before we look into the lore, let's look into the history of the Albino Farm. Located just north of Springfield, Missouri, between Farm Road 165 and 100. Its real name is Spring Lawn Farm. It was purchased by a man named Frank Headley sometime in the very early 1900s. Frank would work on the land and even building a few houses, and soon turned it into a very successful farm. But it wasn't too long before he sold it to an Irish immigrant couple by the name of Michael and Mary Sheedy. Michael Sheedy worked for many years for the railroad and had done very well for himself. He and his wife decided it was time to settle down to have a family. A family that grew to 9 children, 5 boys and 4 girls. The Sheedys were able to continue the success of the farm for several years. At one point, the Sheedys even owned 4 different farms in the area. The family farm would continue to prosper until 1934, when Michael Sheedy died. The farm continued to be ran by the remaining members of the family, but sadly with time, they began to pass away, leaving only 3 daughters left to run the farm: Agnes, Margaret, and Helen. The day-to-day task of running the farm was such a large undertaking for the sisters. The farm itself was 338 acres. The remaining Sheedy sisters were left with no choice but to hire some additional help for the farm. This is where some believe the legend of the Albino Farm began. Since the 1980s, there has been stories circulating about a crazed albino caretaker that wandered the farm, scaring off or even killing trespassers with an axe and feeding them to the cattle. Turns out this would be the more mild tale compared to some of the other myths surrounding the farm. One urban legend refers to a secret hospital in the middle of the farm, one that could have been used to help Union soldiers in secret during the Civil War or used to torture them. Or was it them that was being tortured? A version of the Albino Farm lore says the hospital wasn't used during the Civil War, but instead was the personal hell for several albino prisoners who were rumored to be confined there, held captive by a crazed scientist conducting inhuman experiments on his captives. Another account refers to albino cannibals running into town to kidnap unsuspecting people in the middle of the night just to bring them back for human sacrifice. These urban legends surrounding the Spring Lawn Farm have circulated for decades, and to this day, curious individuals continue to seek it out in hopes of catching a glimpse of something resembling the urban legends. Sadly, all that's left of the farm these days is the foundation of the house that was burnt down several years ago. Or is it? When traveling the northern parts of Springfield, you may come across another wild lore that has been the reason for more than a few teenage excursions into the outskirts of town: the lore of Hatchet Man Bridge. There are a few different ghostly stories surrounding the bridge. Although intriguing in and of themselves, they typically are not what draws people to the bridge in search of a good scare. No, it's the story of a hatchet-wielding madman picking off unsuspecting travelers at night. The most talked about alleged story is of a young couple out for a drive one evening when unfortunately suffering car trouble upon arriving at the bridge. Being a gentleman, the boyfriend got out of the car to see what the trouble was, while his girlfriend waited nervously inside. She heard some rustling outside the vehicle but was too terrified to get out. Then suddenly, things went quiet until she heard a loud thud hit the roof of the car. She buried her face into her hands until she was greeted by a police officer, tapping on the glass of the passenger window sometime later. The officer escorted the girlfriend from the vehicle, but not before giving her specific instructions not to look up when she did. Tired, scared, and concerned for her boyfriend, she began to look for him almost immediately. She let out a blood-curdling scream when she found him hanging from a branch just above the car. The bridge is located not far from Spring Lawn Farm. Because of its location, legend of the Hatchet Man is often tied back to the axe-toting caretaker just up the road. Is it the same alleged lunatic that lingers around the Spring Lawn Farm? Or perhaps a psychotic escapee from the prisoner hospital in Springfield, as one lore suggests? The inmate would hide under the bridge for his victims, capturing them, then placing their heads on the railing of the bridge, like a display trophy. So when traveling through the Queen City of the Ozarks, take caution when traveling on the northern outskirts at night. You never know who might be waiting for you. For our next story, we have to travel to the very edge of the Ozarks, to the Oklahoma-Missouri border, just outside Joplin, Missouri. Here you will find one of the most reoccurring supernatural events in the Ozarks. I'm talking about the famous spook lights of Joplin. The spook lights are often described as a ball of light, bouncing along the stretch of road known as the Devil's Promenade. What makes this urban legend so unique is the fact that you're almost guaranteed to see them when making your way through northeast Oklahoma. The orbs are often described as a bright orange ball, ranging from basketball to baseball size. But what exactly are the spook lights? A light created by natural causes? Or proof of spirits and an afterlife? The Devil's Promenade has its own fair share of urban legends to help explain these occurrences. The first one being one of its oldest stories, a story that stretches back to 1836 during the Trail of Tears, where Native Americans would tell stories of dancing spirits at night. A more in-depth account tells the story of a Quapaw maiden who fell in love with a brave, but her father disapproved of the union and forbid them to marry. The maiden and the brave disobeyed her father and married in secret, but it wasn't long before the father had learned of his daughter's betrayal and sent his own braves after them. The couple ran for their lives until finding themselves at Spring River, feeling they would rather face death together than be torn apart. They leapt into the river and ultimately to their death. A sad ending for the maiden and the brave, but not as tragic as the alternate account of the lore, where they tell the story where the couple was captured. The young brave was killed during the capture, which devastated the maiden, who would then later take her own life. It is said not long after their passing, the lights began to appear, bouncing along the tree line, darting along the road, chasing after each other, or still trying to outrun those who were chasing them. Looking further into the lore of the spook lights, I came across another supernatural tale. This one tells the story of a miner's cabin being attacked by natives while he was away. When he returned home, he found that his homestead was sacked and his wife and children had gone missing. He spent his remaining days walking up and down the road looking for his missing family. To this day, some believe the spook light is his lantern, swaying back and forth, still in search for the family he never found. Others have said that the orb is the ghost of an Osage chief who was decapitated in life and now spends death looking for his missing head. Some have tried to explain the sightings of the lights by using scientific reasoning. Perhaps they're just pockets of natural gas escaping from the ground, and the orange flashes is just the gas briefly igniting. Maybe it's just lights from the nearby highway breaking through the tree line, even if for just a moment. Or could have been from the earthquakes that took place in New Madrid, Missouri between 1811 and 1812 that made the air along the road electrically charged. Many paranormal and scientific groups, including the Army Corps of Engineers, have investigated the area, but none of them have been able to decide what exactly causes these orbs to appear and roam the long stretch of road just outside of Joplin, Missouri. Are the lights just a matter of science at play, or is the explanation something less conventional and more rooted in the realm of supernatural? Whether there's truth to these stories or not has yet to be determined. Personal accounts from some give the impression that these legends are true accounts and that we live in a world where such horrors and mysteries exist. Others view them as an elaborate tale created by those looking to entertain their friends or maybe even frighten a date. But if you ask me, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Next week on Ozark Mountain Lore, as children we grew up with the thoughts of monsters crawling under our bed and lingering in our closets. Turns out they've been hiding in the woods this whole time. Join me next week as we truck through the woods of the Ozarks to learn what creatures howl in the night. For more content, follow AroundTheOzarks.com on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X, or go to AroundTheOzarks.com and subscribe to the daily newsletter so you don't miss when new episodes drop.